has high status today? Who do we all look up to? Whom do the newspapers favour with respectful profiles? Rich people. People who, through their own efforts and merit, have been successful in business, entertainment and the arts. People who make no secret of their achievements. This can seem a dispiriting state of affairs. It can seem shallow or unfair. But it's made all the worse because we often assume there's nothing that can be done to alter the ideals of our society. We tend to think it's natural that certain groups have high status, while others are marginalized. But in fact, it isn't inevitable at all. It's possible to imagine a world where there's been a radical redistribution of respect. Islington, North London. It's Sunday morning. People are getting up. Then they do that most routine of things. They buy the Sunday papers. It seems an innocent enough activity, and a million miles from our anxieties about status. But in truth, such everyday sources of information contain a myriad of subtle and insidious messages about who in the world matters and who doesn't. It was Karl Marx who first brilliantly analysed the way that our values are being shaped without us realising, and he coined a useful word to describe the process: ideology. Marx defined an ideological statement as one that sells itself as being naturally true when it's in fact made up to uphold vested interests. We were, Marx thought, being bombarded by such statements all of the time. In Marx's eyes, it's largely those at the top of society who are responsible for disseminating ideological beliefs. So in a society where power is largely concentrated in the hands of aristocrats, the idea of being an aristocrat and inheriting money is seen as inherently noble. But in a society where those at the top are business people, entrepreneurs, the idea of making money in trade and business is seen as the leading noble idea. In Marx's words, the ruling ideas of every age are always the ideas of the ruling class. The sociologist Max Weber said, "The ritual of reading the Sunday papers has replaced going to church." Taking his cue from Marx, Weber was suggesting that just as priests in pulpits used to be the main source of ideology, it was now the media. Ideological ideas would never rule if they were seen to rule too forcefully. The essence of ideology is that unless our political consciousness is developed, we'll simply fail to spot it. Ideology is released into society like a colourless, odourless gas. Take a random selection of articles in the Sunday papers. Articles about where to be seen in France this summer, how women can now look more beautiful for longer, why Filipinos make the most reliable domestic servants, how to find a promising country home, and why we can no longer rely on jobs for life, but how exciting flexible careers can be. No wonder if many of us finish reading the papers feeling a bit dispirited. We're being subtly rebuked for all the ways in which our life doesn't conform to the dominant status ideals. All the ways our career isn't as stellar, our house isn't as fashionable, our social diary isn't as packed. We may end up feeling as guilty for our failings as if we'd spent the morning being berated by a priest. Ideological ideas, said Marx, are phantoms formed in the human brain that keep prisoners in their cells without a need for bars. Marx wasn't alone. Although the very idea of politics changing anything is out of fashion, it's worth remembering that many of the groups who have status today only do so because they fought for it politically. They wrote pamphlets, changed laws, organized strikes, lay down in front of tanks, and burnt their underwear in public. I caught the bus to Denmark Hill in South London. From 1842 until 1871, it was the home of the critic and writer John Ruskin, who fought a passionate campaign to raise the status and conditions of the British working class.
Ruskin hated almost everything about the world that his mid-Victorian contemporaries were creating. He hated railways, Oxford Street, the sprawl of suburbia, Crystal Palace, but also smaller things like the invention of the fold-away umbrella and the telegram. But what he hated most of all were the values of his mid-Victorian contemporaries. He hated their obsession with wealth. He described them as the most wealth-obsessed people that have ever existed on the face of the earth. The ruling goddess of the age could very well be described as the goddess of getting on, he wrote bitterly.
Ruskin believed that the Industrial Revolution and the wealth it was producing had warped the values of his contemporaries. The modern haste to be rich, he said, was condemning the workers to life in a labyrinth of black walls and loathsome passages, a life of filthy slums, polluted air, and dangerous, stinking factories. Most educated Victorian opinion believed there wasn't much that could be done about such degradation, that it was just the inevitable, natural outcome of the laws of economics. But Ruskin would have none of it. He demanded free education, decent housing, and access to green space for everyone. And most of all, he challenged the central idea of his age, the idea that there was something admirable about being rich.
Ruskin too was desperate to be wealthy, but he had a very different idea of wealth in mind. What he wanted was not money. He wanted kindness, intelligence, sensitivity, godliness, a set of virtues he referred to simply as life. There is no true wealth, he wrote, but life. That country is wealthiest which nourishes the greatest number of happy and noble human beings. Most of those people commonly considered wealthy are in truth no more wealthy than the locks of their strong boxes.
Ruskin made a difference. He set in train many of the arguments that were to lead to the creation of the welfare state. He remains an inspiring example of how, by making a lot of noise, by acting politically, a person can start to alter the values of his world.
In 1906, 6 years after Ruskin's death, 27 Labour MPs entered Parliament for the first time. And when they were asked who was the person who'd most influenced them to pursue politics, 17 of them answered that it was John Ruskin. Mahatma Gandhi, for his part, said that John Ruskin had been the single greatest influence in his life.
Potter's International Hotel, off the A323 near Farnborough, Hampshire. The every woman, women in business lunch. In low-ceilinged rooms, businesswomen are picking at salads.